Let's see, as people start coming in, I'll greet them. Oh, good. Welcome. People are coming in. We'll get started when it looks like we have a full house.
Mm-hmm.
So welcome, those of you who are in here. I think we'll probably get a few stragglers once we get going. I'm Joe Arredondo. I'm the Director of Exhibits and Speaker Programs in the School of Art. Thanks for joining us for this Race and Social Justice in the Arts presentation. The series, we've been doing the series since before COVID, where we like to bring in speakers to address race and social justice. This year, I think we're also going to have a speaker on art and ecology coming up next month. So, we're not quite sure what we're going to have in the spring, but we'll keep you posted with the emails. Let's see, our speaker series are funded with grant support from the Helen Jones Foundation this year, the Stillwater Foundation for the next few years, and then, of course, cultural activities fees administered through the College of Visual and Performing Arts. Shortly, Sangmi will introduce our speaker, but toward the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. There's a Q&A feature in the webinar. You type in your questions and feel free to start typing your questions if you have them while she's speaking, and they'll be in place by the time we get started with the Q&A session. But we use the Q&A feature rather than the chat feature to type in the questions. And we'll be addressing them in the order that they come. And so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Professor Sangmi Yu to introduce our guest.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sangmi Yu, Professor of Studio Art Printmaking and Associate Director of Academic Affairs. Today, I'm very excited to co-host Kelly Belter's lecture with the help of Landmark Arts as part of the School of Arts Race and Social Justice in Visual Arts series. Kelly has been visiting artists for this week, visiting our classes virtually, giving an illustration workshop and screen printing workshop. Some of them are pre-recorded videos and very comprehensive. So as we develop an illustration curriculum, her visit was very integral in shaping up our direction. So in this lecture, illustrator Kelly Belter will discuss how to keep diversity in mind in an illustration project, particularly in the editorial world. Additionally, the lecture will outline how to focus on diversity, how a focus on diversity can help to evolve an illustrator's style and creativity. Finally, this lecture will touch upon how to approach themes of social justice in illustration responsibly. Kelly Belter, she actually grew up in Dallas, so she's Texas born and currently resides in Korea, living and working there, Seoul, South Korea. As an illustrator, she has worked for clients such as The Believer, Max Sweeney's, Stripe, and Tarput magazines. She has also worked with local institutions such as Jeju City, it's a southern island in Korea, and the Korean Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism. Her work was featured in the Society of Illustrators annual book and exhibition in 2021, and she was a recipient of the Print Austin Award in 2020. Their Print Austin event is growing every year. Additionally, platforms such as National Geographics, Neocha, is it correct? Okay, and Urban Outfitters have covered her work throughout the years. So please welcome Kelly Belter.
Hello. Okay, so today I am going to talk about diversity in illustration. And diversity, when we first think about it, because this series is focused on race and social justice, one thing that comes to mind is race in illustration. But when I talk about diversity, I also want to think about other things like gender, sexuality, other types of representation in illustration overall, and even things that illustrators can think about more generally to increase the variety and breadth of their illustrations and style. Working on the things that you aren't good at and thinking of diversity as a skill set that you can learn and improve on as you incorporate that as a factor of your illustrations. So today we're going to talk about character design, as that is one aspect of diversity, but also about the broader sense of improving our skill set as illustrators and our vision as illustrators. And I think oftentimes when we are illustrating and we think about race or social justice, we can feel a little bit like the negative side or the pressure of creating something that is representative, that is appropriate, and it can feel difficult or like we're opening ourselves up to criticism. But I'd like to turn that around and make it into a more positive perspective where we are gaining a new skill and almost learning a new language as we create illustrations for commercial work or other types of work. So first, I wanted to talk about influences and awareness. All of us have our own backgrounds, our own influences and environments, and inevitably those shape how we create our art or how we illustrate. So for example, someone who comes from an English-speaking country, if they move to France when they're very young, of course, they can learn French and speak fluently like a native speaker. Likewise, if we grow up in a very diverse environment, maybe we have a lot of an environment that fosters very great perspective towards diversity. And when that person illustrates, diversity in their illustrations comes up naturally because they grew up in an environment where they saw many different types of people. However, others of us maybe didn't grow up in an environment that was very diverse. Maybe we grew up in a more homogenous environment. And so maybe diversity in our illustrations doesn't come as naturally. I think we all know that phrase for writers, to write what you know. And for art or illustration, at the very beginning, I think a lot of us will draw or illustrate what we know and what we've seen around ourselves the most, the type of media we consume even in our environment beyond the people that we see. And so it's important to take active steps to expand the environment that we're in, to grow our set of resources to become more diverse illustrators. And so I guess we can ask ourselves questions such as, what kind of surroundings do we grow up in or do we live in now? How do they influence our art or our illustrations? And are there positives and negatives to those things? So to give a personal example, my mom is Korean and my dad is American. And I grew up in a suburb of Dallas, which has some diversity, especially among my close group of friends, but overall was a little bit homogenous. And then after that, I moved to Los Angeles for university. And obviously, Los Angeles is a very diverse city with many people from all over the world living there, many intermixing cultures. And then I moved to Seoul. And while it's a diverse, maybe from some people's perspectives, if you're not from Korea, it's an experience that can increase maybe your point of view on the world. Korea is a very homogenous place. There's mostly Korean people, of course, living in Korea. And so you don't see many people from other racial groups really living here. And so because a lot of my illustration career developed in Korea, at the very beginning, I definitely drew what was around me, which was people with more Asian features. Also, because my background is Korean, I think the most comfortable drawing women who had like Asian features. And so that very much limited my work and the type of people I could draw. And it was only in developing my work over time, working with different clients, and trying new things that my illustrations became more diverse. So making our illustrations more diverse and inclusive is a learned skill. And so even if our environment is homogenous, it doesn't mean that we can't become illustrators with who represent more diversity. So I like to frame this gaining the skill set as a kind of hero's journey. And a lot of stories, like famous ones like fantasy stories such as Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, those kind of tales, there is usually a hero who is growing up in their kind of small town, maybe comfortable, just familiar, but boring environment. And then they are invited, or they feel some impetus to leave that familiar place and journey into the unknown. So I think we as illustrators can think of gaining a skill set such as creating more diverse characters as a hero's journey. And the call to adventure, or the impetus for us gaining the skill set, might be the illustration industry overall. For example, there is a really well-known character design festival called Pictoplasma. It's been running for around 17 years. And last year, their main focus was actually about how character design can be more representational and empathetic. And because there is a growing amount of artists, of brands that are speaking up in favor of social justice and that are really demanding diversity in illustrators' work. And so we can't really get by with just illustrating the things that we feel comfortable with or that reflect our personal environment. Illustration more and more is also a global phenomenon. Just for example, I'm living in Seoul and I have a lot of work that comes from America. And so there is this kind of globalization of creative work. And so our work is maybe not only going to affect our city or our country even, but could be spread all around the world. And so we need to learn how to depict cultures and people other than the ones that we see in our daily lives. At the same time, I really like this quote that we want to empower creatives to connect what matters to them. And so we'll get into that when talking about social justice. But there's definitely a balance between the commercial demands of brands or companies that you're working with and your own artistic expression. Okay, so some people might feel resistant to changing their illustration style or doing things that make them uncomfortable. And so I think one way to assess this is to just question yourself. Maybe write down the things that you feel uncomfortable illustrating or talking about. Is there a certain topic? Is there a certain thing that's hard for you to illustrate? Are there things that you're doing that are keeping you in a comfort zone? Just take some time when you have some to write down what those might be. And then ask yourself why maybe you're feeling that way. And after that, I think it's great to look for opportunities to be uncomfortable. There's a Stoic philosophy that we should do hard things for their own sake. So even if we don't know what the other benefits will be, if something is difficult and if it's going to challenge us, that's reason enough to try to do it because it's going to help us to grow and evolve. And we'll talk more about how including diverse characters in your illustrations can be one way to grow. Again, some of the questions you might ask yourself when looking at your old work or recent work is, do all of your characters look the same? Or if you're working on a certain job or a certain assignment, Is there an opportunity to showcase diversity in this assignment? For example, if you have a group scene, what type of people are you illustrating in your group scene? Do all of the people you're illustrating in your group scene kind of just look like different colors of the same build and featured person? Do you have variety? And are you showing art directors or potential clients that you can draw a variety of things? I think it's also smart from a business perspective to think about when art directors are hiring illustrators. If you can only draw one type of person, they might not want to hire you because they don't think that you can really do anything else. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And also looking at old work and thinking, what could I have done differently? Were there any missed opportunities in the past that you could have changed, or you might have changed a little bit if you had been focusing on diversity or representation in that moment? And some people also have difficulty with style and diversity. For example, I have a background in printmaking, and that really affects my illustration style. It's very limited in color palette much of the time. And so I don't usually include every color of the rainbow or like natural skin tones in my illustrations. So then it could be difficult maybe, or some people might feel, oh, creating diverse characters doesn't really fit into my illustration style because I don't really use natural skin tones or something like that. Or I like to draw characters that have these certain features or look a certain way. So the characters won't really match together if I try to make them more diverse. And so I would recommend a couple of things. So first, for my example, where I use like more limited colors, one thing that I do is, which I also think is good to do regardless of if you're using natural skin tones or unnatural colors or whatever your palette might be, is don't only make characters different because of a skin color. Are you giving them different facial features, or is their hair different textures, or are they different heights and shapes? Do they have different maybe like cultural dress, or all of those things could contribute to more diverse characters. Even thinking about gender, non-binary characters, there's like a huge population of people, and there's many ways that you can represent differences and variety in the characters that you design. And it's also important to note that practice makes progress. Don't wait until you have an assignment to then decide you're gonna create a very diverse group scene. I think it can be really valuable to create a resource for yourself in your sketchbook where you just take time enjoying drawing different people who look different ways. I think we talked, or I mentioned earlier, about environment, and beyond our environment of the literal people around us, there's also the environment of media. So our entertainment, movies, magazines, all of that. And these days it's much more diverse, and we see like models of different shapes and sizes and colors. And so it's easier than ever to find references, and especially online, photos of all different people, even ones that are not models. But yeah, how are you using references when you sketch? Are you only looking at models from Vogue magazine when you draw sketches? Are you drawing different kinds of people? And when you have some time to develop that, you can start thinking, okay, well, how would I draw this person in my style? And how can I adapt a person who looks like this into my world, my illustration world? So you can definitely use your style and your parameters as an illustrator to draw all kinds of people. It might take some time, but having a resource like a sketchbook where you have drawn lots of different types of people And you can look back on that when you have a group scene that you're illustrating later and be like, oh, I can include this character that I've drawn before, or that character. That will also make things a lot smoother later on. Just like you wouldn't run a marathon before you did any training or practice runs, right? So I wanted to give a few examples from my own work and some projects that made me think more about diversity or representation. So the first one was for a beverage, which featured different, the beverage was based on Asian citrus, and my client was, she was from, of Korean descent, and actually it was kind of based on, her company was very like women focused, women run, and she had a lot of women of, like her daughter-in-law was Filipina, and she wanted to include Filipino citrus flavors as well as Korean ones and a Chinese one as well. And so for the can design, we wanted to create these different characters that represented the different Asian citrus with like flowers from that region, with different clothing that was from that region as well, and kind of be able to represent those different characters. And so one thing that was helpful was communicating with my clients and kind of getting feedback from people who were from those cultures on what they thought about the design, if they had any notes or things that they wanted to change or add. And so we did a lot of research of like what the clothing should look like, and that sort of thing, and where the different kind of garb comes from originally as well. So that was, I think that's an important point when you're working on something you don't know well. Definitely take the time to research. And just because you don't know much about a topic or much about a culture, it doesn't mean that you can't learn about it, and that you can't ask people who are working on the project with you, or people who are from that culture, for their feedback. An example of this as well is there is a recent series on Netflix called City of Ghosts, and it's an animated series. It's based in LA, and it tells the story of different neighborhoods of LA, and different like cultures and people of different ethnicities living in LA in these neighborhoods. And so for a lot of those stories, there is like a lot of research that went into it in terms of talking to residents of these neighborhoods, interviewing people. So don't be afraid to research and gather information for your illustrations, even if you don't know much about what you're illustrating in the beginning. You can learn more, and you can illustrate on that topic. So these are some of the illustrations. Another example was recently I did some half-page illustrations and the cover for a university in Los Angeles. They have their like alumni magazine, and the university is Antioch, and they're very proud of and really wanted to feature the social justice themes that really are an important part of their programs throughout the years. The importance of like protest, culture in their university, and diversity. And I even had a specific note after I sent the sketches to this client that they really hoped that I would show diversity in my illustrations, and that they didn't want the characters to all look the same. And I think that is definitely something that I have to be conscious of, because a lot of my illustrations can be very pared down or like simplified in many ways. I have to be careful to not make my characters all have similar features, or to differentiate them very purposefully. And so in the V1, the version 1 and final version of the following illustrations, I did take special care to try to create characters with different features, with different kind of statures, different outfits in order to show that variety that they were looking for. So for example, the image on the furthest left, I tried to include characters with different cultural dress, different like eye shapes, different profile shapes, different skin color, even though these illustrations are only in 2 colors, and there's also white, of course, negative space. You can still do a lot in terms of representing people who look different ways. So don't feel limited by your style limit. And then the cover was also on this theme of protest, and it was really important from the client's perspective to again like feature this idea of protest, social justice, and diversity in their university. So a lot of the interior illustrations as well, for example, the one on the top, they really wanted to talk about people leaving like this very closed off community, this kind of house on top of the hill metaphor of a enclosed and not very open space, and leaving that and kind of becoming more environmentally active, activists for the environment, activists for social justice. Also in the lower right-hand corner, the green and black illustration, part of that was talking about their education program and making education more accessible to different populations of people. So that was kind of the symbolism in that illustration. And so some ways to talk about social justice could be through symbols or through talking with your client about what they think is important in the article that you are illustrating for. You don't always have to be an expert on what you're drawing, as long as you're open to receiving feedback and kind of getting that information as well. And so that can lead to the question of, do all illustrators need to be activists? And I think in the traditional sense of like being very, very outspoken, not necessarily. I think everyone has their own way of being an activist. Some people in their illustrations especially, they really have a cause that they want to talk about, that they want to spread awareness about, and that is very apparent in their illustrations and the way they speak to others and present their work. Other people are a little bit more quiet, or some people even prefer to be involved in causes outside of their work. Maybe they don't feature activism in their illustrations, but maybe they work at a polling center, or they do other like kinds of activism. So I think as long as you are being genuine and finding those causes you care about, I think that's an important part of being anyone, not just an illustrator. And so how do you choose a cause, and what are some different ways to get involved? I think we don't want to feel like we're pandering to people, or personally, I don't like feeling that I'm only talking about this cause because it's popular, or because it's something that is hot on in the news, or that kind of thing. I really want to care about the things that I talk about and spend my time presenting or tying my work with. So one example of some kind of activism that I was involved in was during the Stop Asian Hate movement. I spoke to a group here. They do a podcast, and they also run a creative community called Creative Soul Sessions. And so I created a piece of artwork for them to promote like the Stop Asian Hate message. And then I also went on their podcast and had a conversation with them about art and activism with another guest as well. And I think for me, like that's kind of the style of activism I like, is having conversations with people. When opportunities come up, I like to be involved. But I'll give some examples of other artists who are involved much more, who are much more outspoken. And so maybe that's your style. And so I think find the things you care about. And if you see an opportunity to talk about it, then just go for it. Whether that's in an illustration on Instagram, whether that's creating flyers, creating free resources for people at protests to use. There are a lot of things that illustrators can contribute. And I've seen a lot of illustrators create materials, free materials, like flyers, posters, signage, t-shirts, all of that kind of stuff to help support causes that they care about. Like even selling work and then donating part of the proceeds or all of the proceeds to a cause that you care about can also be a form of activism. So it doesn't always have to be in the most obvious way. You can also do it in your own quieter way if you're more introverted. These are some quotes from an artist and a friend of mine that is very active and is an active, I would call her more of an activist and illustrator, named Ashley Lukachevsky. And she really emphasizes how artists can amplify the experiences of people who are marginalized and draw attention to injustices. And there's, in her work, for example, she likes to give people like a call to action, like give examples of things that other people can do and spread awareness through her illustrations on what the public can do to help certain causes, especially particularly in the United States. And one silver lining also is that artists can be very outspoken. We don't really have to censor ourselves. People aren't afraid to express their values, especially online. And so any one of us has a space to contribute to that conversation and to talk about the issues that we care about. So when, as an illustrator, when you're thinking about diversity, when you're thinking about representation and race, maybe you can find certain artists to look up to as mentors from afar, of course, but especially when it comes to, like we said, style, or maybe you're not sure how you can create art that's more representative. Sometimes it can be helpful to just be more aware and to spend some time looking at others' work as well and take some lessons from things that you see. So are there artists you can look up to as mentors who maybe they have similar values as you, maybe they are activists for causes that you're interested in, maybe their style has some similarities with yours and you realize, oh, I can represent people in this way because this artist is drawing their characters in a way that I think I can like understand or that I can learn something from. And so look at their art and think about how it relates to diversity and inclusivity, and if that's something you can learn from. So I'll give you some examples. So first, I already mentioned the quotes from Ashley. A lot of her illustrations are of very like empowered people from many different backgrounds and races, especially people from LGBTQ demographic or from minorities, like various racial backgrounds. And of course, in her very recognizable style. There's also Love is Wise, and she kind of incorporates this unconventional color aspect to a lot of her characters. So if you don't like illustrating in traditional colors, I think a lot of her work is a good example of how you can represent characters with different features without just relying on their skin color. There is Tess Smith Roberts, and I included her illustration because it's quite a different style, but I think something that a lot of maybe students could relate to, kind of a more cute style or friendly style, but you know, one that still includes differences in the character design, as well. I also included some works by Anna Leovy and Kelsey Rotten. Kelsey Rotten is a comic artist as well. And I also thought this was a good example of, you know, not only illustrating in color, but maybe even if you do black and white illustrations, if you're creating a group scene, you can see all of her characters have different features, different hairstyles, different kind of things that distinguish them from each other and make them very distinct. And she's also a queer artist, so that's also something to keep in mind. If you don't always have to think of diversity as something that has to do with race or ethnicity. It can also apply to things like gender, people with disabilities, a lot of different categories. So that is basically the gist of it. I think overall, we can all learn to make our illustrations more diverse. No one is perfect or finished with learning and improving, and there's always new languages we can learn to speak when it comes to diversity and representation. And I think the important thing is to continue being open to learning and listening to people and keeping our eyes open to new ways of seeing the world. So with that said, maybe there are some questions that we can discuss for the last 20 or so minutes, if that is okay with everyone.
Thank you so much, Kelly. There's one question in the Q&A box.
Mm-hmm.
You wanna answer that question first?
Sure.
Well,
So I'll just read the question out first. So influences and awareness. Would a diverse online influence awareness be sufficient? For example, being active in global art Discord where there is art different from many different backgrounds? Or is the digital world too unreliable and separate from the physical world to create a change of how we approach diversity in our art? I think the digital and physical worlds are very connected. I think like most of us are connected to social media, and a lot of our physical lives are spent looking at our phones or connecting with people online or sitting at our computers. So like, yeah, I think it's fair that not all of us are going to travel abroad to a different country. I think travel can be great, but you can create connections with people, thankfully, online pretty easily. And I think exposing yourself to different influences doesn't have to be in person. If it is in person, that's great. But I think having that focus be online is also sufficient, as long as you're constantly seeking things out. And if there is an opportunity that comes up in real life for you to interact with different people, to learn about a different culture, then I think just being aware of those opportunities and taking them when they come up is great. But I don't think you have to do things in the physical world like travel in order to have diverse influences. I think online is a good place to start for sure. How have you represented, second question, diverse people in your work? For example, do you research and ask people in the community about specific types of disabilities you want to represent? Overall, I'd love to hear how you navigate it. So for the packaging example, in that case, I did have a lot of back and forth with the employees at that company who were from the cultures that we were representing in the character design, about especially like the outfits, the accuracy of them, and their feedback kind of on the overall design of all of the characters. And so in that case, I think that was one way. Talking to people is one way. But I don't think you have to always ask people in the community about their feedback just to represent diverse people in your work. I think if you want to have a scene of like various types of people with like you mentioned, disabilities. I think you can do that research on your own and just spend time kind of looking at people with, like, for example, different body shapes. Like, not everyone has the same body shape. And so if you only draw people with a certain body type, that's not being very representative or diverse. You don't necessarily have to talk to people with all different body shapes to be able to draw that. So I think if it's like something very sensitive though, and that's like the main theme of the illustration, it's not just like a group image, it's about a specific disability, and you're not confident that you are depicting it in the correct way, then it would be great to reach out and talk to people from that community. And like in the previous question, reaching out to people online is a great way to do that. But I think overall, you don't always have to ask people unless it's like a very sensitive topic, or you're like a very specific topic, or it's the main focus of the illustration is on that, like a disability, for example, then you would want to be more careful and gather more information, I think. Yeah, that's how I would navigate it personally.
I have a short question, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it was kind of, I was curious about how you use the kind of measurement of the paper when you gave a workshop to the drawing illustration class. You said something about A4 paper instead of letter size paper. So it was still kind of interesting, that kind of it's sort of a code change in a way. So you're navigating two different cultures. You got educated in the United States and now got the second degree, master's degree, and living in Korea as an illustrator and printmaker. So how do you navigate working two different global spaces, and how does that work out? Because you have to constantly transition from one thing to another in terms of techniques and formats and communication.
Yeah, I think that's a good example. So like in America, we would say letter size, which is a slightly different size than A4, which is used, I guess, more internationally. And then even in Korea, a lot of times when you buy paper, it's like sajo, or it's like a different measurement as well. So I think it's kind of like speaking languages, but just more specific, like illustration or design related, like code switching a little bit. I guess to navigate that, it's just always good to keep in mind, like, I think when I talk to clients, I kind of just keep in mind where they're coming from. So if the clients are American and we're speaking in like inches or like dimensions in that way, then I'll kind of take their lead as the illustrator. I'll usually just take the client's lead on that. But I do think it's good to be aware of in design and illustration, like how people from other countries might talk about similar things, like even things like centimeters and inches, and just not assuming all the time that people might know what you're talking about, and trying to be mindful of where the people you're working with are coming from. So if I was working with an American client, I might expect them to talk about dimensions in a certain way, versus if I was working just in Korea. But yeah, I think that's a good way to navigate it, is just thinking about where the other person is coming from, and not just making assumptions about what that they will understand you right away.
Thank you. There's a comment from Tricia Earl on the screen.
Okay, Tricia says, thank you for hosting this speaker. Great topic and action items presented for us all to think about in our work. Yes, I hope that if there's a takeaway, it's that everyone can learn to create diverse and like a variety of work, even like beyond, I think, character design. For example, some people, they more enjoy drawing characters and they don't really like drawing backgrounds. And so even that's a way to diversify your work, like focus on the things that you don't think that you do well and develop them rather than only doing the things that you think that you excel at. And sometimes you find that, like I think I mentioned at the beginning, that this can make your work better. So for example, like at the beginning, if you're having to draw a diverse group of characters and you're used to only drawing like characters that look a certain way, that can be very uncomfortable. But you'll discover like how to transform your style and how to like use your tools in different ways because you're facing this kind of a more challenging project. So yeah, I would encourage everyone to find a challenging project after this that they feel a little bit intimidated by and try to conquer whatever that is.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, are there any other questions? So for us, this is a kind of new program. So I'm really pleased to see a lot of interesting outcomes coming from student work. And this illustration topic was so insightful for us, trying to learn, even faculty, we are always renewing for new things. As we were speaking, there was another.
Oh yeah, okay. Okay, so Joshua, hopefully I'm saying that correct, asked, as art becomes more globalized and diversity becomes a mainstream idea, how important is a diverse approach for clients? So I think it's very important, especially like just in my personal experience, clients specifically have asked me and like written notes like, we want there to be diversity in the illustration. It's like a pretty important value, especially among brands who are trying to be global brands, not just exist in among one demographic. So yeah, I think it's pretty important, especially when you do like editorial illustration. I think we also need to consider that other people are going to be influenced by our illustrations. So we're part of the media that becomes someone else's environment. So that's also like a personal responsibility issue as well, as if we are representing people as a whole on a larger scale than just ourselves. But yeah, I think for clients, it's something that a lot of them will emphasize. And so it's good to have that mindset from the beginning of, oh, how can I look for chances to add diversity to this piece of work? I think that's always a positive thing. And will the seminar be available to view again?
Joe can answer that question.
I think so. We are recording it, and so it'll be a matter of editing it down so that we can post it online under the speaker series. And so we should have a link to it in about a week or so.
All right. If there's any other questions, that's all we have for now. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and Kelly Belter for staying up until 1 o'clock. So I really appreciate it because of the time difference. It can be very difficult. All right. So thank you, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.